Good morning, good afternoon. This is Dr. Satyam Priyadarshy. Thanks for joining this conference, UDT EU 2021, and this is the digital skills panel. If you are supposed to be in some other panel, please check. Otherwise, you are in the digital skills panel. And I think it is the most, as I call, is one of probably the most important panel as the world has changed on us. And as I call that, we are all facing what I call this compounded disruption. That doesn't matter which industry we talk about. And of course, many of us are from energy industry or related to energy. But irrespective of that, almost all businesses are facing what is called compounded disruption. One is the growth of emerging technologies. The second one is I call the energy transition. While it's great to talk about energy transition in an energy companies, but energy transition impacts every other business. So one has to really be careful about how we actually talk about this. And then the third one is the maturity of digital technologies, and hence this panel is critical to discuss that. And the last one is the impact of pandemic, which has actually changed the adoption of digital technologies. In fact, I know in February of 2020, I was meeting some executives in the Middle East area, and they said, "Oh, we don't want to do cloud. We like people to be in the office and all." And within like a week later, they call me back and saying, "Oh, can you guys come and help us with cloud implementation?" That is the fastest adoption of a technology has ever taken place in the history of energy companies, right? Whereas cloud has been there for a long time. But this requires a change in whole digital skills landscape. And it is I think all of us are being involved in this study of how do we leverage digital, how do we grow digital skills, how do we increase the maturity, how do we get the readiness ready, and as well as leadership. I did a survey in the last 4 or 5 years, and I have created what is called a digital minefield, the gap in understanding of what digital skills mean, from leadership to operations to the field. And it's a fascinating numbers. Since Paul is a professor and an academician full time, he would understand that if these were the students, they would fail the course. So very fascinating. So what I tend to do is I'll do an introduction of everybody will be introducing themselves, and I'll start with mine. Very simple. I am a technology fellow and chief data scientist at Halliburton, and also the managing director of India Center. My background is quantum computing, quantum chemistry, and all. But I am enjoying my time in the oil and gas industry, leading the COE, build the team from scratch, and it's actually good time to transform the industry. With that, I'll hand it over to Paul to introduce himself. So Paul, please introduce yourself.
Satyam, thank you for the kind words to start off, and thank you UDT for the opportunity to be here today. Paul de Leeuw, Robert Gordon University. I spent all my life in the energy industry around the world, mainly with the operator community, Shell, BP, Centrica, Marathon Oil, Amoco, and other organizations, mainly in the big strategy commercial type roles. Now work at Robert Gordon University, one of the leading kind of energy universities in this space. Most of my work is advisory work around the future of our industry, future of energy transition, and the future of work, and how people are going to be successful in the world. I think people are absolutely key. We can have the best technology, the best buildings, the best everything. Without people, it's not going to get us there. So I'm completely biased, and with Satyam, this is the most important panel of the conference. That's me.
Steve, you are on.
Okay, thank you, Satyam. Steve Johnson, I'm Vice President Digital for Petrofac's Engineering and Production Services business. I've worked in the energy sector for the last 25 years, with over 20 years of those primarily in the oil and gas domain. My role is pretty broad. It's to look across our business within Petrofac, understand how technology can enhance or transform the service lines and the services we deliver, identifying technologies that we will bring into the business, change the way we turn up to our clients, deliver value for them and ourselves. And that goes from the identification, experimentation, testing of the technology, all the way through to the actual adoption and implementation, working with the teams across the business.
Uma, you're on.
Hello, everybody. My name is Uma Ranganathan. I work in Equinor. I'm a senior leader in the People and Leadership organization, and I'm responsible for the people, culture, and leadership in the IT digital functional space. And it's been about more than a year that I've taken on this role. And I think it really relates very closely to my areas of passion, which is around change management, leadership, performance, skill and behavior transformation, which I think lies at the core of digital. We can build a lot, we can buy a lot, but if we don't change behavior, I don't think we're going to move organizations. And I think that's been my passion in terms of the work I've been doing in the past 14 months, which has been around competence, capacity, and leadership in terms of helping drive the digital transformation in the company. Otherwise, I'm a psychologist by background, and yeah, I enjoy working with people and seeing them transform. So happy to be here at this panel. Thank you.
Excellent. So I think we'll start with the first question. And please, those who are listening, please type your questions that you want to ask, and we will answer those during the course of this conversation. The first question is that if you look at industry in general and more specifically your organization, how has your organization or you think industry has adopted the digital skill readiness programs so that the energy transition landscape, the energy industries can be a big player? So start with Paul.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question around the whole energy transition, because we see in the future we're going to have an energy workforce. It's not an oil and gas workforce, it's an energy workforce. So we need to have people, it's almost like energy agnostic skills. And actually, what is the key enabler of these energy agnostic skills is actually having tools at your fingertips to make, having the data, having the capability, the technology and decision-making ability to actually make the kind of trade-offs in these various industries. So I think the whole digital transformation is aimed at a kind of energy agenda. I mean, I'm great to see Petrofac here and Equinor, because I know they have kind of already really exciting plans for the energy transition. But I think that's going to be key. But because we're transitioning, and we've already talked about it, change management is going to be key. That's the largest part of the equation. We get the people, we get the technology, but the change management is going to be key for digital transformation. And I think digital is going to unlock a new future for energy. If we get this right with the skills we have, we kind of have integrated systems, integrated people, integrated energy, and that I think going to create a completely new world of how we're going to look in the future and look and use energy. And I think that is going to be enabled by digital. So I think energy transition is a massively exciting opportunity.
Steve?
So I think, I agree with the excitement Paul's conveying there. From a Petrofac perspective, we've got some very exciting ambitions in terms of the energy transition. But I think one of the ways we've looked at it is it's important to understand not necessarily new skills that are required, but what is transferable as well. Much of what Petrofac does and has done for a long while, we've been working not only in the oil and gas sector, but for more than 15 years, we've got a track record of supporting offshore wind. We've done that on the basis of exactly the same skills and experience that we've used within what at the moment is still the heart of the company, where most of our work comes, which is from the traditional oil and gas sector. But a lot of these projects require the capability to engineer and manage infrastructure, the same type of infrastructure that is used in the oil and gas sector or analogous, and the same skills in terms of managing projects, dealing with the complexity of those investments and then through into operations is something equally as important to look at, along with the sorts of things we're doing in the digital space and transferring those into that wider industry domain. No doubt, when you look at things like CCUS and hydrogen, there are specific skills that you need to actually bring into the organization, and that can be through building up the skill set of your core resource, building partnerships. There's a lot of small innovative organizations out there who are working in the energy sector. And I think the other thing is around culture change. You've got to change the mindset of the business from being almost totally focused on oil and gas, and that's where the future of the business is, to one with a much wider energy frame, and recognizing and having the confidence within the teams to recognize that the skills that we've leveraged and the experience we've built up is actually equally applicable to the projects that are coming up in that space. And we've certainly seen that with a number of successes that we've had with some very interesting projects at the early stages that we're currently involved in.
Thanks, Steve. Uma, I think you're next. So you probably have a lot to share.
No, I'll try to build on what Paul and Steve said. They've mentioned quite a few good points. I think one of the things in Equinor, we learned quite early was, we have a lot of things that we can start making the whole company about. Like, we want to be a digital company, or we want to be and then we have to really think about what's the most fundamentals in terms of business. It's safety and security, it's energy transition, it's about driving business value, it's about being a sustainable company, and then really making sure we keep these principles very intact while we adapt our business and our business strategy on digitalization. So that has been very important for us, because it's very important to keep anchoring ourselves to the purpose. What are we trying to achieve with digital? It has to be very clear. That has been a journey, I would say. Second, I think it's been about having a good vision. But in case of digital, a vision is not an end goal. There can't be an end goal. And I think it's about organizations and people actually getting comfortable with that, which I think has been a journey. A lot of times, for example, when we engage with our people, they've asked us, so where are we trying to get with digital? Who knows? I mean, it's evolving. So getting mindset comfortable with that continuous evolution, I think, has been a very important adaptation for our organization and for the business. I think, Steve, you mentioned a very interesting point, which is we build on our strengths. And I think that is very critical, because this is not about flipping the company upside down and saying we have to completely start from scratch. There are companies that have very strong offshore knowledge. We have very good subsurface knowledge. We have geographic. We have a lot of engineers who have skills that are transferable. And I think it's a question of how we really transfer those skills into digital transformation. So one of the things we've been doing a lot is reskilling, I would say, our subsurface professionals on data science. And it's a motivation, it's a change driver, and it has been very effective in terms of transforming the company. So, and then finally, I think I see in terms of businesses adapting, we as a company, but also our peer companies, we're much more forced or kind of facilitated into a process of working as an ecosystem, of collaborating with each other, finding common solutions, which I think was not as much probably a decade or two ago. And I think that's been quite an adaptation for people. It's not just we think about our peer companies as competitors, we think about them as collaborators and to find common solutions. So these are some ways in which we've had to kind of transform the organization, but also it's coming down to mindset and habits.
Absolutely. Yeah, I joined this industry about 7 years ago. I'm not from oil and gas industry. I came from academic world and technology data native companies, where collaboration was the key to success, and certainly was very beginning for digital from the scratch, right? Especially in oil and gas industry, the perception that it has large volumes of data, I think that was broken for me, because when I came from internet companies, or even in the 19s or to early 2000, we were getting terabytes of data, and I had to monetize that data. So when we look at drilling area, or seismic can claim that they have large amounts of data, which is the data in motion, as I call it, that has been created. But in terms of creating value, I think the energy industry and specifically oil and gas has been well behind the curve. And I think when this question of digital skills come up, I think we were actually a little bit ahead of the curve in the sense in 2014, we believe that data is an asset, an important asset, and hence we built the COE. And over the last 5 years, we have actually trained thousands of people around the world in this digital skills. We built the whole curriculum ourselves for the highly contextualized for our industry. We can talk about that later. But very important part is that it is, as you said, it's a change management, and the cultural aspect of it is very important. You said collaboration, very important. I use the term co-innovation because we are going to innovate on the data, and that has been a hallmark of adoption by many of the companies. And certainly some companies even went out and changed their name to the whole energy name, so which is an interesting change from a cultural point of view. But the question is, when you are looking at these bigger picture, you have skills development in, say, domain-specific training, so to say, geoscience, geology. Then it comes to drilling and process and others. How does you justify and how do you allocate the budget for digital capability development in your organization, or any insights from the industry? How is that thought out? What's the process? How complicated is it? Right? What are the challenges in allocating the budget for digital technologies, skills development?
I assume you want me to start first. So
Yes.
I can't speak on behalf of the company. I'll leave it to Stephen to about to do, because I'm working across the industry. I pick a few things up from the previous conversation before I answer your question. A lot of the work we have done in this space is we think around 90% of the skills from oil and gas are transferable to other energy sectors. That includes digital. So if you're HR or you're finance, you can move across without that much skills. If you're a project manager, you can move across. Some of the things Stephen and Mo are talking about, you can move across. Certain elements are not as easy to move. When you are a drilling engineer, it's quite hard to work in solar, for example. You know, you kind of needs a bit of retraining. So what we find is the industry is actually quite an interesting position, right? So what we find for the work we've done is that oil and gas, in terms of digitalization, is actually quite far behind other sectors, finance, media, automotive. But if you look at the sector itself, operators and tier ones are actually quite a bit ahead of the mid and small sized enterprises. So, you know, there's a kind of big, not all the whole industry is equal. And then if you look at the companies, exploration, Satyam, you picked it up already, seem to be more mature than kind of building new projects, and then operations, you know. So there's a kind of different element of digitalization that we see happening. And the other thing we see happening is certain job families are more mature than others. So it is actually a kind of subservice is far ahead of some of the other sectors when it comes to digitalization. So back to the question you ask is, how do you prioritize? And this is a conversation around value and not just kind of hard cash on the kind of a per BOE or per unit of output value, but this is where you can make the biggest difference. Now, so far, if you look across certainly this part of the world where the money has been spent, a lot of the digitalization money has been spent on production monitoring, optimization, maintenance, that kind of activity, quite a lot of on the subsurface part. I think over time this is going to shift because the energy transition is driving the shift. It's going to be about system integration, kind of combining activities, providing data to the whole supply chain. So just the operator has the data and does something with it, but actually we have complete data lakes open to everybody. So I think the value starts shifting over time. But again, the first element is let's lift the industry. The second thing is let's lift everybody in the industry. Then lift all the job families and make sure they get it, and then make sure we prioritize the money wisely, because there is what I call data haves and data have not still in the industry. I'm going to stop there.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Your insights.
I think it's very interesting. There's many facets, I think, to answering that question. So, you know, I think starting at the user end, one of the things that we've really adopted within you know, the digital journey we've been on so far is we don't want everybody to have to be an absolute expert, and you know, the technicalities and complexity and skills you may need to actually have to use the tools be a barrier to adoption. if I'm an operator, I'm part of a team running a facility or a maintainer. I want to be able to use insights and information and tools that I can engage with quite simply and readily. So we've very much put a lot of effort into making sure that the barrier to actually engagement and adoption is minimized for the users. So that's one piece, and where we've done that, and we have a very structured process in terms of how we go through from identifying the technology, experimenting, proving the value, and then as you go into the implementation, a structured approach to change management, how we engage, and using a range of different tools to give the level of knowledge transfer and training and skills that are required. And that can be as simple as e-learning and a level of guidance, videos, using all that type of media to support it. So that's probably one end of the spectrum. And then you've got another end where, as an organization, when we started on this journey, we might have had people who had the data science capability, but if you try to find somebody with data science as part of their role description and responsibilities, or a data scientist, in Petrofac, you wouldn't have found anyone. Whereas now we've built a capability in-house, with individuals. So we've been out and we've sought skills, but we're also in the process then of, upskilling individuals who have a willingness to engage in that area. They basically have the capability, from their background, to have a combined engineering domain knowledge along with data science skill set, so that we have a center of excellence within the organization, rather than just relying on outside resources. And I think the third prong to that, which we really are only at the start of the journey, is really democratizing some of the actual tools, and by upskilling the organization to be able to engage with that type of approach, using low code, no code type solutions, but giving those into the organization in a controlled way, where they've got sufficient skill and knowledge to understand how they can make use of those within the framework we're creating now. As I said, that's very embryonic at the moment. That's what we're beginning to start over the next few months, and we see that as another element, hopefully, in building a very innovative culture. You're reinforcing that innovative culture within the business, so we're getting the advantage of the brain power of thousands of people rather than a few tens of people, so to speak, and seeing what then gets created out of that.
All right, I think Uma will have more fascinating story on 14-month journey. How should she allocate?
I think to be very open, it's every company's difficult choices that we are every day making. But one of the things I believe strongly is, it has to be two-folded, and that's top down and bottom up. And when we think about top down in terms of allocating capabilities, I think it's very important to let the company's strategy drive the decision, because we have to, as I said previously, also keep anchoring to what are we trying to achieve. So like in Equinor, our strategy in a nutshell is always safe, high value, low carbon. So when I ask my leaders on the go, what is your project anchored to? Safety, okay, what's the value? And then how are you going to contribute to low carbon? Are you able to really think through these and at some level generate value for the business at scale? So I think these are some parameters on which we try to base our decisions around, how to prioritize capabilities. And then, of course, there is other things. For example, what could be quick wins? What skills are transferable? What tools are transferable? And where can we have an easy inroad? Because, it is transformational change, but it still has to happen in pieces. It's not going to be we wake up one day and the world looks different. So we have to build on some of those elements as well. And then we have bottom up. What I think about bottom up, and this is where I work a lot with leaders, because it requires a lot of leadership and foresight. It's about empowering your people to invest time in learning and learning things that may not be obvious today. So we may not be using some technologies, or we may not be using things today, but as long as we think that there is a potential, can we allow people to learn? Can we allow them to test, to experiment and share, and build a little bit of a sandbox so that when the demand comes, we have the capability. If it doesn't come, doesn't matter. We've built a knowledge organization. And I think that's a bet we all are taking probably in terms of building skills. So this is where I see we have some of the dilemmas, and we hopefully bring our strategy and our leadership foresight to use it to the rescue.
So one question that is I'm going to add on to this question is, if you look at the oil and gas industry, they talked about digital oil fields roughly about 25 years ago. So why, in your opinion, why is it taking so long for us to really adopt digital skills in practice?
Well, that's a tough question, but let me give it a go. Give other people a bit more time to think about it. But I mean, I don't think we haven't tried. I mean, there's a lot of fantastic initiatives taking place around it. But I mean, the other thing, the reality is this has been a relatively high margin business for quite a long time, and again, what we did was a perfectly good methodology. So when you look at other industries which had smaller margins or more kind of challenge, they actually had made a change earlier because of necessity and competitive pressures. Now, when the industry comes in and saying is actually for environmental reasons, for the low carbon footprint reasons Uma was talking about, and kind of because of the business we need to transform, I think there's a kind of real clear business imperative. We need to do things differently. We had a very interesting piece of work recently, which really struck home for me, is we asked people, Satyam, Steve, what do you actually do, right? How do you spend your time? It's quite a fascinating question we asked lots of people. And what we find is that roughly 1/3 of people's time, and I don't say this is yours, but roughly 1/3 across the industry is spent on transactional activity. It is doing repeatable activity, the kind of week in, week out expenses, reporting, and whatever monthly reporting. And what we said is actually, as an industry, we actually have a lot of low-hanging fruit. We can digitize our activity set. We actually can fundamentally change to free up people's time and capability to focus on higher value activity. And I think what the tools being enabled by other industries, the tools being enabled by the COVID situation, by the energy transition and everything else has been, I think, a hugely big opportunity, saying is actually we need to transform. And I think what I now see happening is a completely different nature of conversation. I've been in this industry a very long time. The conversation is different. It is now digital is part of the corporate strategy. Digital is part of the leadership conversation. We have CTOs or chief digital officers on the board or on the boardroom table. It is shifting, and that shift, I think, is happening and kind of changing it. So digital oil field, let's call it a digital energy unit. Maybe let's call it oil field, but I think the new world energy transition, we will see it, and we'll see it's already there.
Steve, your comments, why it took us 25 years?
I think probably resonates with some of what Paul's saying. You need an imperative for change. It's very, we are, my experience in the oil and gas sector is it's a conservative industry. In the past, very good margins being made. And I've also seen and experienced where in that 25 years, maybe in the early days, attempts were made to do some innovative things and they didn't work. And therefore you get a combination of, well, is there really the imperative to change? We're making good money now, so why would we spend money on that when we can actually go and create a new field, invest there, everything's working, and well, we tried that before, so it's not going to work. I think absolutely, as Paul's described, over the last 5 years or more, there's been much stronger imperatives for change coming into the sector, and that has driven a need. There's only so much you can cut costs through traditional ways, and without actually finding the efficiency gains that many parallel sectors, manufacturing sectors, even downstream, have been pretty good at this, whereas particularly the upstream sector has been fat and happy, as they would say, and basically not needed to do that. Now, to actually get the margins that we're looking for to be viable, you've got to actually find new ways, innovative ways of increasing the production, reducing costs, removing the wastage that Paul was talking about, making the most out of the resources you got, the most important of which is the people, and having skilled people focus their efforts on where their skills come to bear rather than doing these repetitive tasks. So I think it's a combination of all those things, coming together that now is giving us, much greater acceleration. But I still see that there are many barriers within the industry to, from where I'm sitting in the service company, to see that progress. The commercial models that are within the sector don't necessarily encourage investment by service companies to basically bring technology to the fore, because they are they actually in some ways are counter in terms of driving efficiency. You get potentially rewarded for being inefficient. If you're on a man day basis, why would you want to cut the number of man days that you're actually delivering your work for? You're actually cutting your own throat by doing that. So there's some fundamental things that we collaboratively as an industry still need to actually address to drive, and continue to drive this, this digital transition.
So, Umar, your viewpoint on this, why did it take 25 years to talk about it?
So I'm going to build on what what Paul and Steve just said, and it's about, I think it's coming down to being competitive, the business becoming competitive, and the push to actually be competitive. And then, of course, there's energy transition and what comes to our rescue in terms of aiding the energy transition in terms of digital. I also think it's a lot of incentive, it's the influence from the investors and perhaps also geopolitical pressures that is probably shaping a little bit of this digital agenda. And then from a skill perspective, I very simply think about it as, I think oil and gas / energy industry, it's time for itself to kind of make itself more attractive in terms of an employer branding and an industry branding to be at par with other industries. And I think that's very critical for this industry to be more kind of future sustainable. And digital is probably one of those elements that will come a lot to rescue in that sense. So yeah, those were some of the additional points that I think why it's taken so long, but now there is sudden acceleration.
Yeah. So I'll just add on to that. I came in 2014-15 and I was talking about it, and I can tell you number of people around the world who told me that you are in the wrong industry to talk about this. We will never do anything with data. We do enough. We know exactly what we do, but we don't want to do this. We have done in fact, there were people who told me that we have done every algorithm possible in AI in our industry, and it doesn't result in usefulness. And when I wrote an article on data democratization in 2015, took me a long time to get it published because they said we can't do that. And today everybody is talking about democratization. And in fact, we are talking about crowdsourcing. Imagine that, citizen data scientist. So it took 6 years, even when I started this journey. And it fascinates me that, some of the reasons Paul said is very true, Steve added, and it's still even though we use the word acceleration, I think they're still very slow. If you were to compare with even industries which were behind us in oil and gas, for example, healthcare, which have actually managed to really accelerate the pace of transformation in terms of digital skills across the board, not just healthcare in the sense of treating the patient, but in bringing the sort of not directly connected proteomics data, bioinformatics data coming from, which is completely in individual fields, and they have been able to pipeline that to build what is called precision medicine, right? So it's as regulated as oil and gas industry. So there's a lot more acceleration needed in oil and gas, I think. But irrespective of that, so if you look at, yes, we are on the journey to mature that digital skills. So what is your organization doing to bring the capabilities to the current workforce? So we'll start, Paul, of course, you will have industry view. So maybe start with you. What are companies doing? What you see to bring the digital skills capabilities to the current workforce? We're not talking about bringing people from outside. That will be a separate question.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 dimensions here. I can talk a little bit around the industry, also a little bit around the future workforce, which we see to our students. So a few things around that. So I think what we currently have seen experience, not just with the COVID crisis, but the economic dislocation and all the other complexities, I think we have actually seen digital capabilities being accelerated in companies. You know, you see the remote working, what we do right now in this online conference, the collaboration tools, you talked about the cloud, data storage, data security, but also around is how we now think about our business. I'm sure, Steve, you'll see it in your organization as well as, but I mean, supply chain capacity, capability, how do we build redundancy in the system? And, you know, when there's a problem, we can still operate, you know? So we actually have already built a huge amount of digital capability, and probably the last year, we've probably accelerated 3 or 4 years just in 1 year, you know, in our industry as well. But it also highlighted for me some digital skills gaps. You know, you can see we have a leadership gap. You know, I think a lot of people in the industry don't know, are not necessarily informed buyers. So we have a leadership gap around it. What does good look like? What we can learn from other industries, and how can we play it? We have a huge variation what we see by job family. So there might be some people in data science and data analytics who have the great skills, but we have lots of other job families who do not have the skill. So the legal community we see is one of the most exposed to digitalization. We see the supply chain community being hugely exposed to the finance community. We see huge elements of gaps happening. So I'm great to hear what Steve is doing in Petrofac, but even I would say across your organization, you'll have the challenges. Now, from a university perspective, this is important because we're feeding the future workforce coming in. And what we see is that students want to have digital skills. They want to combine mechanical engineering with digital. They want to know how to do big data analytics and computer science. So the interface of disciplines where people want to go to, and a lot of people now coming in to do that big data, data analytics, and digital skills is hugely popular at university. So I think we have a long way to go in the industry. I think the other panelists mentioned as well. But this is where leadership comes in, is how do we create it? And we might have to recruit people who've done it. I mean, people like you, Satyam, coming in from other areas. Maybe we need to take people from the finance sector, from the retail sector, who actually digitize their businesses. And saying is, how can we go from 3G to 5G equivalent as a company in one go? You know, accelerate our thinking and just forget 4G in the middle. Maybe I want to hear from Steve and then Uma first on this one. Thank you.
Steve, I think you're on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've touched on some of this on one of the previous answers. I think, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. I mean, I think the starting basis is creating a general awareness. You know, again, it links into sort of behavioural change and cultural change as well, is that we're taking the organisation on a journey. We were using the word transformation. So if we're going to transform an organisation, we have to take the people with us, and there's many elements to that, but one is a general awareness of what is Petrofac doing. It goes back to the point Uma's made on several occasions as to what is the actual business trying to achieve, why are we doing this, how does it fit in with the direction the business is taking, linked into energy transition, linked into the performance objectives, the growth objectives that we're actually putting out there, so that there's an awareness of the why we're doing it. We're not just doing it from the point of view of it's interesting to have new tools to play with, and there's a group of boffins within the organization that are working away in a dark cupboard somewhere and having a really great time playing around with this technology. It's really got to have a business impact. So there's a general awareness element, and then link back to what I was saying in terms of the user piece. It's engaging users and being as at the grassroots level as wide as in terms of that user engagement in many different ways, in terms of identifying what the opportunities are, where digital could come into play, and also their involvement in the maturing of the solutions, and breaking down some of the what are really artificial barriers to adoption and knowledge, because at the end of the day, most of us have a smartphone, if not all of us. And one of the simple things we did was we created an app that we give to all of the workforce who are mobilizing to various different sites around the world. And this used to be done in a very repetitive process, labor intensive process, with a group of individuals who were getting on the phone to tell people, thousands of people, where they needed to be at any point in time to mobilize to the heliport, what hotel they need to be in, etc. Creating an app that the workforce can download from the App Store, and then basically by engaging with that, get all the information that they need at their fingertips, to actually mobilize to the asset. And we've seen that really break down some of the barriers of what digital is about, because it's a realization that it's transferring some of what we naturally engage with in our everyday lives into the work environment. Some of the skills that we actually have built ourselves in engaging with iPads, smartphones, are actually the same skills that we want to use and leverage for this digital transformation. So there's an element there of just breaking down the fear factor and getting people engaged with it, all the way through then to, for new graduates coming in, the leadership, individuals who are taking on specific roles, who have actually showed an aptitude to take on specific roles, exposing them by on-the-job training and specific training to build skill sets up like data science, so that they can actually take the opportunities that's there in front of them. So it's a very wide mix of different tools that we're using to take people on that journey.
Uma, your experience so far in transforming people internally?
Sure, and I'm going to build a lot on what Steve and Paul have said. So if I really think about transforming people internally, training is one part. What we've seen that has really been our journey, so if I use some sort of a change management thinking, as you said, Steve, it's starting with awareness and creating a sense of purpose. And of course, there is these huge corporate statements and everything, but I think it comes down to personalizing it. So, we had a story where we talked about, can digitalization save lives? Because we know in oil and gas industry, people have lost lives. That created a lot of impact on people that, okay, I can actually come to a more safer workplace. So it's connecting to some of these purpose-related actions. And I think that's where storytelling to create awareness is very powerful. And then if I think about awareness as it's the first step, people are probably going to do something about it, or they're just going to let it stay. But then, so what we need to do next is, I think, create desire. So I know it, okay, now I want to do something about it. And that's where I think what we've tried to do is, one thing is pushing out technologies and telling people, hey, use, the company has got this, we're investing in this, and you've got to use. Versus, as Steve said, think about the user. Here's what your daily life looks like, and here's what we're trying to do to improve. So tell us, what can we do to improve? So user centricity in terms of creating the desire. And here we make a little bit of I make a distinction, which I think is narrowing the gap, but still, there are developers and there are consumers. And when we think about skill building, we may focus a lot on, the developing capabilities, or the data scientists, the software developers, etc. And then this huge mass of users. How do we make sure they actually use it? How do we make sure we actually make decisions based on data and create stronger usership and ownership, and in a way, citizens? So that is one where we've tried to kind of distinguish and make sure we have adequate focus on both in our training activities. In Equinor, we have a digital academy that we've launched under our Equinor University, which is our internal learning service provider. And what we've tried to do is, have this academy partner with our flagship digital projects to create learning pathways. And then that is part of the project execution, that people go through this learning pathway. So that has helped us get people on the go, as well as use the tools, practice the tools, get familiar, and then get more engaged. Not just, okay, we're going to spend 100 hours on training, but then what? So we need to connect it, which is my next point. You create desire, you train, and then people need to be able to apply it. I think that's when I'm sure most of our workforce learned maximum about Microsoft Office in the past 12 months, because they probably had to use it, and it was real. So yeah, and then finally, I really believe in one thing, which is reinforcing. What behaviors do we recognize and reinforce? What behaviors do we talk about? I think we will get more of that. So do we celebrate people who are curious, who learn, who experiment? Do we talk about them and promote? I think that's when we'll get more of that behavior. So yeah, that's been a little bit of our our journey. And I wouldn't say we're there, but we still kind of have our challenges, but at least I feel we have the energy and the drive in that direction.
Yeah. So we have got a bunch of questions. I'll combine a couple of questions into one question because I think they are similar. The question is, would there possibly a time when the digital skills become more prominent, important than the worker's parent or initial skill set? How does digital skills complement and not eliminate identity?
Wow, that's a broad question.
Yeah.
Let me give it a go if it's right, Satyam. So, I mean, I do think the energy transition is going to change the nature of work, right? So if you think about what is it like to operate an oil and gas platform compared to a wind farm or to a solar plant, it's very different, right? I mean, and again, you can build the new facilities with digital agenda and big data and AI all in mind, right? So I think the new world is going to be different. So yeah, we will see kind of we need, as Steve said, you need the old skills and you need the new skills, but I can see the new world of how we're going to operate energy, how we're going to integrate energy, you know, we need to find a way to generate it, to store it, to use it. Everybody becomes a generator, everybody becomes storing it, and it's going to be very different. So I can see that there's an element of parts of our business will be completely operated in a digital way. You know, again, there's no reason why you can't operate a new wind farm or solar farm from your iPhone if you think in an extreme way. So I think we will need a large degree of new skills. However, having said that, there still will be existing skills which will kind of be important. Somebody needs to do the planning and consenting for the new activities. Somebody needs to kind of place the orders, build it, install it. That's still kind of tasks we need to do, which will of course digitally be enabled. But I think how we're going to learn, how we train are going to be different. I mean, I was very encouraged what Steve talked about around the app of where people need to be. But I don't think we're going to learn from our colleagues and our supervisors and our bosses anymore. I think the future will be we might learn from the equivalent of YouTube. You know, we might have, say, actually everything is described of how we do, and it has intelligent systems to do so. So I think core skills are always there. We always need the activity because it's driven by the activity, what we need to do and how we do it. But how we're going to install it, how we connect it, how we're going to work will be very different. So I can see that will be part of our business where digital and digital skills will be the leader. There will be other parts where it is in support, but all of us need to have digital skills. The leaders need to make sure we can have the decision to do something with the information. But as companies, I mean, I've spent all my life in the operator community. You need to be an informed buyer of the capability, because if you don't know what's out there and how you use it, it's a very difficult position to be in. So I think it's going to be an interesting mixed bag, but yeah, I can see part of it will be completely digitally driven.
All right. Steve, you have any additions to that comment?
It's almost it was almost a flippant comment that it depends. I mean, at the end of the day, it depends on what role you're playing, and I think from my own perspective, from a Petrofac point of view, is you definitely see, I mentioned it before, new roles coming into the organisation which are very dominated, you know, and quite rightly targeted in terms of sustaining and supporting the digital solutions and the ability to leverage data. But on the other end, you know, as Paul said, there's many roles where digital, it's not replacing your core skill, it's actually allowing you to do that in a different way. Digital is actually part of the toolkit that you're utilizing to enable you to deliver those skills maybe more efficiently, maybe better, maybe removing some of the, you know, the drudgery of the repetitive processes that were mentioned before. So I guess I'm repeating what Paul says. It really does depend on the circumstances, and also I think the personal, you know, preference and, you know, where an individual sees themselves going. I think that there will be opportunities for individuals who may come from a, you know, an engineering background, for example, like myself, who, if they've got the aptitude and the capability, could transform into a role which is, you know, different and, you know, dominated more from a digital perspective rather than their core skill. But that comes down to a personal preference and where people see their careers going.
Uma, your comments on that question?
I mean, just to build on both of them, you know, one of the things I'm going to make a distinction between is when you say skills and discipline and education or background versus your abilities that are more innate. So your problem solving ability, conceptual thinking ability, collaboration, abstract thinking. I think those are, to me, more integral part of an individual's identity. And those are certainly transferable. It's just the way they're going to collaborate, the way they're going to problem solve is going to be different. So as long as Steve said, we have a personal preference where we are flexible enough to adapt and learn, but then still use our core capabilities differently. I think digital in that sense is an enabler. It's not going to take over, is how I see it.
So there is a very one simple question. What is that? With one or two exceptions, do you think industry gets digitalization? I have seen a lot of false starts because the company is not committed just using the phrase.
It's an interesting one. I mean, again, it's not normally necessarily the technology is the problem, it's the management of change, for this tends to be the far more complicated one. I mean, the thing is that in the companies, so even let me start the operator community. And again, I only speak for the UK, but the vast majority of people do not work in the operator community. The operators tend to have around 10% of the staff in the industry, 90% is in the supply chain. And we ask an awful lot of the people in the operator. They need to run a business, they need to do investment decisions, they need to change the technology agenda, all that stuff need to happen. I'm sure we'll talk about it later on. There's a huge amount of change happening in the operating community. You can only deal with so many digital projects or digital transformation activities. There's a capacity issue of how you do it. And I know it from my own past when I was in the operating community. So it's a practical question around, is it, how do you do what is most successful, what is what? And that comes down to choice, competitive advantage, and strategy. So if your company wants to do that thing, that's a choice that you're going to make. So not necessarily, I think it's the success is determined, does it fit your strategy? Do you want to implement it? Is the management of change working? Now, I've seen some incredibly successful projects happening around the industry. We're saying is, wow, that is just absolutely sector leading. And I've also seen complete utter disasters where you actually said, well, a complete utter waste of time and money. But most of it wasn't because the technology failed. It was about the ownership, the implementation, the behavioral elements, the culture of an organization, how to make things happen. And our trick in the future is we don't have a choice anymore. We're going to have to make it work, because this is becoming a more and more competitive industry, and our product becomes more and more commoditized, and therefore we have to be competitive. We have to make it work. We simply have no choice.
So Steve, do you think digitalization is just a term that some people use?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very difficult to comment beyond your own domain and who you interact with. I certainly feel that I would certainly say within Petrofac that's not the case, and we're very committed to that journey. I'm bound to say that. But I also think in terms of the clients we deal with and some of our competitors, there is a substance behind a lot of what they're putting out there. Whether some of it's overstated, in terms of what's in the media, versus reality of what lies behind what has been achieved and what's been implemented. I think there's an element of that. I think the key thing is that the industry, I think, has suffered a little bit with digital being potentially the latest fad and the excitement of getting after that, and maybe rather than thinking carefully about what the priorities are, where to start, I think Paul mentioned a strategy of maybe focusing on a few things and implementing them successfully, and then driving and building confidence at all levels within the organization that type of approach is going to deliver bottom line value. I think we've seen in the industry that some of the failures are because we've taken a bit of a shotgun approach in places, got many MVPs or POCs, many of which show potential but never go beyond that stage, sit on the shelf, and are not really transforming the business at the moment. So I think that's one of the things that's holding us back a little, because in a company like Petrofac, where we have chief financial officers who are very focused on where every pound is spent, where the value is going to come from. If they don't see a return in a reasonable amount of time, then the appetite for spending more money on yet another innovation is going to be difficult to get supported. So I certainly think the approach we've taken in Petrofac is to focus on less and achieve more, and then build from there. But that possibly is not where everybody's been, and that's probably held some companies back.
Umar, so do you think digitalization is just a term?
No, I don't actually, to be honest. But I think I would speak all the way from, can each one of us actually personally stand up and just say digitalization is a personal, it's just a term? No, we know it's changed the way we work, with the way we connect with each other, the way we deliver results. So I think I choose to look at it all the way from the employee perspective, and I think it's changed a lot. And then when I think about leadership, even more, it's changed the way we collaborate, the way we have to drive performance, the way we deliver results, the way we expand business. So it's both what and the how. And yesterday we actually announced our Q4 results, and we did announce that we had made improvements, 400 million through digital and improvements. So I think this is real. It's happening right now, and I sense that businesses are very committed. And as a company, I do feel we're very committed. The key is, as Paul said, it's prioritization. Because you may want to do everything, and everybody wants to start out by changing the world, but I think we have to choose the key game changers and really go big, go deep, and then go fast probably. And go fast in the sense of rush slowly. So that's how I think about it.
I think we have lots of questions actually. But I don't think we can address them. I think we have only 5 more minutes left. Yes, so I'll just add one comment on digitalization. No, it is not a fad. It's not a buzzword. It is a real thing. The gap that exists into understanding the term, I think Uma mentioned change management, transformation, culture, that all comes into play to actually talk about these the journey. We call it the digital journey and its maturity. So I think companies which have failed, I think they have the wrong priorities, let's call it that way. But otherwise, I think it's a reality, and if we don't really leverage the digital aspects, I think there's a lot more challenges. In terms of skills, I think you heard that everybody is doing something internal, external, at the leadership level. It's very, very important. So in the last 4 minutes, what I suggest is that we'll ask all the panelists to say what 2 things they should take out, which is important to be relevant in the digital world, especially in energy sector. What should people do in terms of building their skills or their expertise, or how to interact and grow into this digital space? So maybe 2 comments. I think that should take us to 3 minutes left.
So Jim, I will be very quick. I think one is to be a really informed buyer and stay informed, to know what's out there. And the other thing is be an informed user. Know what's good for you, use what you need. You don't have to know everything. That's me.
Steve?
Yeah, what do I think there? I think one of the things I would say, if you're in an organization and you've been constrained, or there's a certain way of doing things, embrace the opportunity if it's provided to you, from a bottom-up perspective, to identify what the pain points are and where technology could actually help drive that efficiency. Because what we found is the good ideas often come when you least expect them, and they come from the bottom up. And something that could be seem relatively simple and obvious to you actually could have a really big impact on the organization and the digital transformation. We've certainly seen examples of that. And I think I'd reiterate what Paul said there in terms of, keep informed, take the opportunities that are offered, both within your work life and, maybe outside in events like this, to become informed about what is actually happening out there, what other people are doing, and see whether you can take some of those ideas or thoughts back into your own role, into your own business.
All right. Uma, what 2 things people can take?
Well, as simple for me, I think this also goes for any change management, right? One is be curious, to have a radar around, to kind of learn about what's going on around you, and then have the ability to be flexible to change habits. Because I think it's really at the micro level, it comes down to each one of our habits and the way we think and the way we work. So yeah, be curious and be willing to change.
Yep, I think we'll wrap up the session. I think what we learned today is that digital skills are critical. It's time for us to make personal change as well as help the organization through change management, cultural transformation. I think Uma, Steve, Paul, all three said the same thing about cultural transformation, which is critical. And opportunities are there. And I think the resources are there, at least now that energy industry, both internal and external. I think Steve said that, Uma said that they have digital academy, and some sort of, almost all organizations are doing that. It is, I think, up to individuals to figure out. So I know there are some questions on mechanical engineers, the drillers, and everybody. I think digital impacts all these areas in different ways. And so learning digital skills in any area of oil and gas life cycle is important discipline. And not everybody will become a neural network data scientist, but there are aspects of digital skills that will be important, whether it comes to mechanical or drilling, whether it is application of robotics. So I think there is always room to learn these skills, and I think currently the industries, every company is actually making effort to do that, which is actually a welcome change in this industry. With that, I think I will wrap up and hand it over to the organizers of the conference, and we'll wait on the panel here.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Just a few quick words. Just say thank you to Satyam, Paul, Steve, and Uma for being involved with the panel. Very interesting discussion, I felt. So that's it for day 4 of the conference. But I think in wholehearted agreement with the panel when they say about the importance of being informed. So you can join us tomorrow to keep informed about partnerships and collaboration and its importance in digital transformation. And until then, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Nice meeting you.